this update for December 8, 2022, date 208 of the war, end of the date update. I'm gonna start with strategic updates, and then we're gonna switch to battlefield and general situation in Ukraine. So I'll start with energy, as we talk about it a lot, but it is extremely important type of commodity. So Europe continues to live in the world of pain. Natural gas went up to 1,700 US dollar per thousand cubic meters. Electricity went up to 400 euros per megawatt hour. This is more for France. I spoke about France, the problems there with nuclear power. UK in the same sort of boat. Switzerland, Belgium. Doesn't look like Germany got there. I mean, it's still expensive, but not quite there yet. So the point I'm trying to make is that Europe will be sort of living in this world of pain. Sometimes it's gonna get into remission. Sometimes it's gonna flare up back again. For as long as there is no change to energy policy in Europe, as long as European leadership is going to fight conventional energy, Europe will not have, let's say, reliable and affordable energy. And actually, I would even add, mean like ecologically friendly sort of energy. Because if you remember, I showed that right now Germany burns coal, lignite. I think it was Poland. Basically, all kind of like the worst and dirtiest kinds of energy resources that's available, as opposed to trying to do sort of more reasonable things. Because they shut down. Actually, Germany shut down nuclear power plants, and so that's that's a result of that. Now, continuing energy, but sorry. Continuing energy, but switching to Turkey. So Turkey is demanding 25% discount on natural gas from Russia. This has been lately a big trend in, call it Asia or non-traditional Western buyers. That's sort of, I guess, the approach everywhere is, you see weak animal, you try to take advantage of it. And that's what's really happening to Russia. If you remember, Pakistan got something. India probably is getting something. China is getting something. So basically, Russia has to offer significant discounts. At the same time, it's still very profitable for Russia, even after these discounts, because there's big misconception when people consider, cost of Russian crude, and they think it's $20-$30 per barrel. The cost is about $10 to $12, and by that I mean also what I'm referring to is a cash cost, right? How much cash costs you to extract that crude from the ground? That doesn't include more sort of accrual costs, which is investments and so on, because all of those investments at this point are stopped, right? Russia is trying to survive, and it's squeezing, milking the cow, and I would say not feeding the cow at the same time. But it's possible for a long time for Russia, because the reserves there are, huge, one of the largest in the world, and they're many of them are fairly easy to extract, with exception of, say, Far East and up very north, but the rest is not expensive, let's put it this way. So more likely than not that Turkey is probably going to get that discount on natural gas, which will help the internal Turkish situation. At the same time, Turkey is basically preventing Russian crude oil tankers to leave Black Sea. This is Black Sea here, right? So everybody knows there is a Russian seaport, Novorossiysk, and most of the tankers leave from there, carrying Urals. This is type of brand of one of the brands of Russian crude oil. and so they got stuck in Bosphorus and Dardanelles. This is a strait that connects Mediterranean Sea to to Black Sea, and Turkish authorities, don't allow uh, Russian ships to leave, demanding this marine insurance, right? So formally, Turkey didn't join um, the sanctions against Russia, and I think this is a sort of typical Turkish approach to get better deal. Let's put it this way. So I think once they reach the deal, suddenly Russian oil tankers probably will sort of be able to sail through Dardanelles and Bosphorus. Going back to them, however, situation right now is very difficult for Russia in terms of crude oil. Uh, so first of all, obviously, all of those tankers are stuck, so you cannot really export this Urals, and Urals accounts for 60% of Russian oil supply. The other big one is ESPO or ESPO. That is Far Eastern crude oil. That one, obviously, there is no bottleneck there. It can be supplied, and there is, it's very close to China, so there is big demand to Japan. That sells at essentially no discount for about like $68-$69 per barrel. Even though there is now little discount, I think it's like $6, but still it's fairly negligible. So Russia does get extremely good sort of profit, as you can imagine, 68, 69. Except I would say, in case of this ESPO, it's the cash cost is higher. It's unclear how much higher, but it's definitely not 10 to 12 US dollars. It's higher because that's what more for the Urals. That's very low cost to produce. Because it's sort of normal conditions, in the Volga basin and so on. So that's a little bit better and easier for Russia to produce versus the ESPO, ESPO. It's the conditions there in the area where this is much harsher, more difficult. So, anyways, going back to this whole Turkey story in Urals, which is 60% of Russian supply. So not only Turkey not allowing Russian crude oil tankers to go through Bosphorus and Dardanelle straits, it actually reduced purchases of Russian crude itself by almost like I think roughly two times. So Turkey was buying 380,000 barrels per day, and just for reference, Russia is producing around 11 million barrels per day, and let's say China buys about 1 million, India slightly less than 1 million. I don't remember numbers, but roughly like 800,000-900,000. So this is sizable sort of buyer. Turkey is another sizable buyer, so they reduced to about 200,000 from 380. So that's almost two times cut. So this is probably some kind of pressure, as I said, from Turkey to achieve what it needs. It could be also political sort of pressure because Russian troops are in Syria still, despite all of this. So, and there are some sort of clashes there between Turkey and Russia. Uh, so, so as a result of that, this Urals now is selling for $43-$44 per barrel, right? So that's just as you can imagine, typically it trades close to Brent, which right now is like I think 76, somewhere in that ballpark. So as you can see, this is very 32, $33 discount to Brent. But it's still, as I said, $12 minus $12. So Russia's still earning $30 per barrel. So it's still quite profitable. It's not end of the world. So for now, Russia is facing these difficulties. They do look more sort of as a temporary difficulties. So once there is agreement with Turkey, I think the flow will continue. But for right now, it is difficult for Russia, no question about it. Then also on energy, continuing now to Ukraine. Ukrainian parliament There are calls there to stop transit of Russian natural gas and crude oil through Ukraine. So, for those who don't know, there is really large pipeline that kind of goes from a little bit south of Kiev, and then it goes to Zakarpattia, then it goes to Hungary, Slovakia, and supplies essentially a lot of natural gas to that part of Europe, including Austria, Czech Republic, all of that, and I think even flows to Italy, if I'm correct, and southern Germany. So that was another Russian route for supply of natural gas that's still working. That would be pretty painful blow for the um, you know, Russian government. In terms of crude oil, Ukraine wasn't is not a big sort of transit country for crude. It is still, but it's more Belarus sort of case. There's some the pipelines that I believe supply diesel fuel, so basically a product, already processed product, as opposed to uh, the raw material. So that may lead to additional shortages of diesel fuel in Europe, because if you remember, I reported about the Hungary having problems, and they have to increase the prices for both gasoline and diesel. So this may kind of increase sort of pressure from that angle. Uh, then now let's actually mention a little bit about India. So India, so kind of like not didn't volunteer, but like uh, India is willing to supply spare parts to Russia for airplanes, for apparently locomotives, for some cars. So essentially, this whole blockade of Russia doesn't quite doesn't work that great. Let's put this way. I mean, it is terrible in terms of energy, but even technology, which is right angle, right? If you really want to achieve something, the right angle is really technology, because Russia is extremely dependent on the Western technology. So that's a sort of right angle of attack. But as you can see, India is sort of willing to undermine that as well, obviously for profit. This is not done out of kindness of the heart, just purely for the money reasons. So remains to be seen if that's gonna will become real. At this point, there's quite a bit of problems in Russia with spare parts for airplane, because obviously Russia is using Airbus, they're using Boeing, so that is hard to get to Russia, or even if you get it, it's a sort of like a black market. Then the spare part becomes so insanely expensive that the whole system breaks down and doesn't make sense anymore, essentially. So if you don't have sort of steady, reliable, and low cost supply of spare parts, so the Russia started sort of cannibalizing some of the airplanes in order to maintain the fleet of the passenger airplanes. Now let's switch to China, and I spoke about uh, the Chinese president visit to Saudi Arabia. I mentioned that this is not just Saudi Arabia. There's a bunch of all of these Persian Gulf countries. I think UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, all of those. Essentially, they all went there. Basically, it's a meeting of all of these countries with China. It's not just Saudi Arabia. It's basically the entire group. Uh, this whole group is meeting with China, and essentially they effectively want to switch to become vassal of China as opposed to the U.S. Essentially, that's what is going on there. And there was an announcement that there were, I think, 34 investment deals signed there during this meeting, with the value of at least 30 billion. So not everything has been reported. So it's probably higher number than that. So from that we can clearly conclude that the visit is successful, and there is mutual interest to continue cooperation, continue sort of going in this direction. As I said, this is big problem for the West, because Without Persian Gulf, without cheap energy and reliable energy, the quality of life in the West will go down, tremendous. Not even 2 times. It's probably going to be like 3 times. Could be even in some countries 4. Obviously depends on the country, right? In the US, it's definitely be not going to be 4 times. Maybe definitely 2. Could be as low as 3. But some other countries in Europe that extremely low on resources can easily go 4 times. So you can imagine what this really means for the West. But that's a result of all of this misguided energy policies in the West that alienated Persian Gulf and essentially pushed them to become ally of China. This is sort of not sort of like a firm open. They still sort of testing the water basically. But if they see that okay, it's possible, we can do it, they will jump on that train. And I just want to explain a little bit about this Persian Gulf region. It's essentially all of this tiny oil producers, with exception of Saudi Arabia, which is by size is not tiny, but population is small country. Let's put it this way. These countries cannot exist on their own. Basically, they're not able to self-defend. So they only can exist if there is other sort of big country that protects them, right? It was U.S. and protecting, but there's sort of a deal there essentially. We protect you, but then you sell crude oil in U.S. dollars, right? That helps cement U.S. dollar as sort of like a main currency of the world, right? The position. It's not the only reason. It just helps cement. That's what I want to highlight. It's not that's not the main reason, because in Russia and in China, this is popular idea that if they undermine, they basically flip this Persian Gulf or trade in crude oil from, let's say, U.S. dollar to, let's say, Chinese yuan, or Russian ruble, which like totally impossible, mission impossible. Then they can sort of destroy, domination of the U.S. dollar in the world. That's obviously not, I would say, it's not going to happen. The simple reason is why sort of U.S. dollar dominates relative to other countries is because there is more trust in the U.S. system than all other systems, because the system is better designed. They not per they if you just in absolute terms, I would say they're all bad systems, but it's a least bad system. That's probably the best way to describe it. So it's a least bad system out of the world of the bad systems, and so everybody who has any capital, they will go to least bad system, right? They're not going to go to the worst system. And the problem with that is that the reason, like how you determine is the least bad or the worst system, is the dilution of the of the currency that happens. And in US, dilution is minimal. So like that's why Federal Reserve is willing to do minimal dilution of the currency to keep interest of the international capital, and so it stays in US dollar. So in communism, dilution is sort of happens day and night. So nobody will ever go and start trading in Chinese yuan. It's never gonna sort of dominate the world, never become international currency. As long as China is communist country, that's mission impossible. So this attempt to sort of destroy or undermine this US dollar system is doomed to fail, right? Because the problem is in actually China and in Russia, nobody will basically there's no trust in those countries. And I mean by that not just the regular person, but people who have capital. And those people tend to have quite high intelligence, so you cannot really fool them easily, like you can fool average person. So basically, this is kind of like there's always dream in Russia, especially in this KGB world, like that they're gonna destroy U.S. dollar and so on. They will not. The only sort of distraction will come from within of the U.S. That's the only way how that can be distracted, and not by sort of flipping Persian Gulf to trade or to so basically sell crude to China or anything like that. So in India, the same. India rupee is not it's not a currency anyone would trust. There is no institutional mechanism. There is no sort of understanding, sort of not to do sort of this dilution of the currency or basically inflation of the currency, right? So you can even basically look at inflation, and where the inflation is the lowest, that's the most stable currency, and that's where the capital will go. And assuming also obviously that you're not gonna get it expropriated from you and so on, because there are sort of totalitarian countries that they have low may have low inflation, but nobody will ever go there in any circumstances anyways. So hopefully this explains a little bit like what China is sort of trying to do, and why it's not gonna sort of be not gonna happen. But that's sort of like the plan maximum for China and Russia and Iran, right? The plan minimum is just okay. We want to secure supply of energy guaranteed to us, and ensure that that energy doesn't go to West, and that is already very clearly has been achieved by China. Not because China is so skilled in diplomacy, but it's basically the result of the West's policies. And so going back to this whole Persian Gulf, so they always need sort of protector, and before it was U.S. Now they actually considering China as alternative, and it looks like that's where it's all gonna drift. The reason they need protector because they have sort of natural enemies that can easily overwhelm them. And by that I mean Iran used to be Iraq as well until it was destroyed as a country. Then there's a Turkey there, even Egypt potentially, but that's at least sort of dangerous enemy. But they have enough sort of enemies so that they realize that they will not be able to exist on their own, and they need some protector. So that's a whole dynamic there, and whoever's protector gets the benefit that the oil is going to be sold in the currency of the protector. And so that's a whole sort of, hopefully that makes sense in terms of what's going on there, what's going on with this visit. And so in a summary, it was successful, but in terms of plan minimum, in terms of plan maximum, it's not going to happen no matter what China tries. Then also in terms of energy in China and Russia, China is requesting Russia to supply more natural gas. So again, that really helps Russia right now because natural gas is essentially blocked to Europe, and may get even worse with this potential stoppage of transit through Ukraine. So every bit helps. As I said, it's low profit export to China for Russia, but if you have nothing, it's this is better than nothing essentially. Then let's just another point about China. So Dutch authorities finally announced under, if you remember, I mentioned this about months ago, that US was putting pressure on Dutch authorities to limit export of chip making equipment to China. And by that I mean ASML. That's the sort of a producer, the sort of the final producer or assembler of those lithography machines. That lithography is a process that's used to manufacture those chips. So, but it's actually ASML is sort of not alone. Carl Zeiss is another company that's critical for SML. It basically supplies all of the lenses and optics for lithography. Without it, then SML cannot really function, cannot achieve what it does. So they kind of like go hand in hand. It's kind of like a, one system essentially. If you remember, I mentioned about a month or 2 months ago that actually Carl Zeiss is building factory in China, which was sort of strange at that time, and it becomes even stranger, right? Because now you understand that that's this, one of the key component in ASML machines. So that's essentially transfer technology to China. But anyways, this Dutch authorities sort of trying to kind of like reduce export of this lithography machines, and they not sort of like banning everything. They start with 14 nanometer chips. So the chips are sort of go in sizes, nanometers. So nanometer is fairly modern. It's 2014 technology. So most of the computers that were produced at that time have 14 nanometers technology. So it's essentially, so everything before 2014 is kind of like allowed. Everything from 2014 and onwards into 2022 is kind of getting prohibited. So, but it still allows you to, you can use whatever 22 nanometers. So you can your basically your computers are not going to be as fast as productive, but what you can do, you can make it up by increasing number of computers, right? Yeah, it's going to be might be harder in terms of the military technology because sometimes the space is very important and very limiting factor. So that's why there is a logic. Okay, let's limit this smaller sizes, 14 nanometers, because then there is a 10 nanometers, which is 2016. Then there is a 7, which is 2018. Then 5 nanometers, 2020. And 2022 it has 3 nanometers, and then there is a 2 is the next sort of frontier that's expected in 2024. Basically, it's more miniaturization of the chips. They're becoming smaller and smaller, so you can put on the same space more of those chips, and your processor becoming more powerful. Like this is where this Moore's law is essentially derived. Is you don't even need to know much about processors. You just need to know the size of one chip, and then you have more chips, it's more productive. So let's say if you went from 10 nanometers in 2016 to 5 nanometers in 2020, that means that your productivity went up by 2 times, right? Because from 10 to 5. So this is kind of like the whole logic. And going back to the military applications, it's very critical the size, right? The smaller the size, the better. So if your sort of computers or processors are a little bit too big, and you may not get the same edge military wise as if you have, let's say, 3 nanometers, so 2 nanometers versus 2020 versus 22. So you can see from 22 to, let's say, 3, it's almost 10 times. So this is obviously limiting factor on the development of Chinese military. At the same time, it's not sort of inhibiting development of Chinese military, right? So all they will do, and Chinese very sort of, well, I wouldn't say it's creative, it's just very straightforward. You just put more computers. Basically, you add, you need probably like at this point 22 versus, what is it, 3? Let's say use it 2. So you just put together 10 processors, right? I mean, it's still hard because then you need to put them together in one system, so that creates another layer of the problems. But technically, you can get it done. It's just going to be much more effort and so on. So this is what's going on with China. Obviously, this is definitely not making sort of China happy. Let's put it this way. But increasing sort of antagonism between China and the West. Now let's talk a little bit, switch about to Ukraine. So one thing I just want to mention that Ukraine is getting 18 of this RCH self-propelled howitzers. It's 155 millimeter cannon with length of the barrel, which is 52 calibers, which is sort of standard, high quality, the top of notch barrel essentially. So it's very similar to Panzerhaubitze 2000 from Germany. The same what Krabs has, the same what Caesars have, what Susanus 2 have, what I think I said Krabs, right? All of this is just kind of like standard, or well, let's say top notch artillery sort of specification. The only problem with this systems is that they are wheels based. It's definitely going to be uh, it's not going to work in Ukraine very well. Let's put this way. I mean, yes, in the summer and everything, but in the fall and in the winter when there is a sleet and early spring, this is going to be a problem. The only way you can use this is only on the roads, which is significantly limiting their mobility and ability for counter battery fire. So this is, I would say, engineering flaw. So this is, I'm not saying that this is bad. It's excellent product for Ukraine, but in general, it's very clear that whoever, I think it's Kraus, Maffei, Wegman, that's who engineered this, that whoever did this didn't really think about how, all of the, conditions that they could be used under, and which is in general bad approach to engineering, let's put it this way. But nevertheless, they are excellent in terms of cannons. They are excellent. They also can, shoot while they move. I don't think there is sort of it's the best approach or best idea, but technically that's possible. And Ukrainian army will definitely benefit from that. At the same time, as I said before many more times, Ukraine has very clear at this point advantage over the Russian artillery, specifically in the segment of this high precision, long distance cannons. And if used properly, they're excellent for counter battery fire, and you essentially can decimate Russian artillery with these tools. And there's enough of them. It's probably like more than 100 units at this point, various ones, right? But I would say even more, pushing to like 150 of those at this point. I didn't even track at this point because there's very clear advantage of Ukrainian side. Unfortunately, it's not being sort of, how to say, realized. They do help, but they not being, there is the potential of the systems is not being sort of realized, as I said. So that's sort of on the negative side. Now let's go back to Ukraine. The energy power grid system is still surviving. The situation is bad, sort of like, Ukraine kind of lives in its own world of pain. And with essentially no improvement for probably another year. So if Ukraine would start sort of fixing these transformers and substations right now, the earliest, the problem, the earliest time the problem can be fixed probably in a year, because it takes about a year to manufacture a transformer, right? And I was probably even a little bit generous in terms of timing, but it's very clear that the problem will persist for a long period of time, and there's high chance that the system will collapse. If there is another Russian attack, which is very highly probable event. Now let's look at let's do walkthrough for the front line. Gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from the north. So situation along the state border is more or less stable. There are reports that there is accumulation of Russian troops here in the Belgorod area. As a result, Ukrainian side also keeping here a couple brigades. Actually, I didn't put it here, but there's 47th Brigade. So it's somewhere here in Kharkiv area, basically to prevent attack on Kharkiv. Then let's just kind of quickly strategically look at this before we jump to the North Luhansk front line. There is also accumulation of Russian forces here, like east of Svatove, basically. Most of them are those mobilized conscripts. They're still being trained basically behind the main front line, but there's a very clear accumulation of equipment. I mentioned about those 200 T-90s there, a lot of soldiers. So as I said, the situation moving towards some kind of offensive, just unclear about the timing of the event. Most probably it's going to be January, probably like more like a mid-January towards the second half of January. But unless something drastically changes, this is probably what's coming Ukraine's way. Now let's jump to the North Luhansk front line. Things here are, as you can see, Russian side is sort of getting more and more, I'd say, aggressive. As you can see, more Russian attacks than Ukrainian one. Just one here, and the initiative slowly moving into Russian hands. I would say right now it's probably in between the two, but the trend is in Russian favor. That's still at very early stages. So probably for the most, it's probably practically unnoticeable yet. Then let's move to the North Donbass, where, as we all know, the Wagner mercenaries operating. Things here is pretty bad for Ukrainian side. As you can see, the Wagner mercenaries were pretty active. No confirmation actually that they captured. I mentioned yesterday that there were reports that unconfirmed that Russian troops captured Yakovlivka. So that does not look to be true, or at least the fighting is going on in the village itself, which doesn't mean that it's being lost, but it's very clear that potentially there is sort of, as I say, if there is smoke, then there is a fire. So, it's definitely not good situation for Ukrainian side if the fighting is going on in the village already. We'll continue monitoring where it develops, but so far there's no sort of confirmation of what I said yesterday. Then, as you can see, Russian troops are actively attacking Bakhmut from all angles. The more dangerous is obviously southern situation. So today there were all again attacks by Russian side here. Again, if you remember, I mentioned that it looks like Russian troops managed to get to the western bank of this freshwater channel. Basically, there's no more information to sort of prove it or disprove it. So we'll just kind of keep that in mind that potentially they are here already, have established bridgehead, but it's totally possible that they have lost it or it never happened in a way where there's regular troops. It could be that there are some reconnaissance groups there, but not in a major way. So, but in any case, it doesn't even I said all of the situation is clearly bad for Ukrainian side, and clearly it's not possible to fix it within sort of modern, within the current paradigm of Ukrainian army. So it's just going to be slow bleeding, unless there is some kind of like offensive, which is also impossible right now because there's many more Russian troops on the front line. By the way, on the Wagner mercenaries, there are reports that I mentioned before, there are like about 23,000 of them. So there are other reports saying there are like 40,000 of them. Not all of them are here, and that's not what I'm saying, that there is a 40,000 here. It's probably, I would say, 20,000 here. But basically, this Wagner group is turning into the, let's say, I wouldn't say it's, maybe I'd say little private army, but it's clearly growing on steroids. That's how the best to describe that situation. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here actually relatively quiet. No typical Russian attacks out of this salient here north of Avdiivka. Nothing was out of Piski and Pervomaiske. Actually, Ukrainian troops tried to counterattack here, failed miserably because the same approach practiced, without change, day after day is basically, you know, like almost like a World War One cavalry attacks using this infantry fighting vehicles and sometimes tanks against unsoftened Russian defense, and they predictably getting destroyed with heavy losses in terms of people on Ukrainian side. So, as I mentioned, the correct way is you use artillery to soften Russian defenses, and most importantly, destroying Russian artillery counter battery fire is the top priority, and that's how you start sort of cracking defenses in the first place. And it's not being done. That's why I mentioned many times that this is criminal from Ukrainian command to attack in such a way, because it's very predictable that it will lead to heavy losses. Russian troops attacked a little bit in the southern sector. Again, Marinka was out. Also similar idea, by the way. There's no difference basically between Ukrainian command and Russian command. The same approach, the same kind of like this mindless or criminal cavalry attacks against, let's say, machine guns with predictable results, except this time it's for the Russian side. So basically, whichever side you're in the Soviet army. That's probably the best description of it. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are sleepy, and and more likely than not that they will remain sleepy for a while. Unless the Russia starts its offensive potential January offensive out of this area, which is actually quite possible, because if you look here, Ukrainian troops here are stretched and relatively thin. Yeah, there are, this is a very capable brigades in terms of quality, but with the exception of 65th, I would say. But definitely first 128th Azov, they are definitely have strong fighting spirit and everything, but it's just too stretched, right? If Russia accumulates enough amount of troops here, nobody can stop that huge steamroller. I'd say, meaning like this basically three brigades. Just because Azov is really just regiment, so it's not even full brigade. Again, this is kind of thin here, at least based on information we have. It's possible there are more brigades now there, because the front line is long, at least probably like 100 kilometers, plus minus maybe 120. And there's just not enough troops there. At the same time, for now, Russia didn't have enough troops there either, so it was kind of like a balance. But as you're aware, there are more and more Russian conscripts hitting the front line, and so balance will be lost and will be in Russian favor eventually. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.